Do complex legal issues hold you back? Let's get energized and bring clarity to your top legal questions. This is Law Talk with the Flock by Goosmann Law Firm.
Hello, I'm your host, Jeana Goosmann, CEO, lawyer, author, and woman business owner, here to help navigate you and your way through the law, your business, and life as a leader. For today's episode, I have with me attorney Kelsey Heino. Kelsey is an Omaha employment litigation attorney at the Goosmann Law Firm, and today we're going to talk about sticky employment issues. Welcome, Kelsey.
Hi, Jeana. Thank you for having me join you today.
You bet. And Kelsey, just to kick us off, why don't you tell everyone a little bit about you and your practice?
Sure. So I am an employment litigator, meaning I help companies on both the front end and the back end. On the front end, I help by drafting enforceable agreements and handbooks, policies, that sort of thing. And then on the back end, when employment issues arise, I guide employers through the agency process or through the courtroom if we have to get to that point.
You bet. And in that role, I'm sure you see quite a few sticky employment issues. What kind of sticky issues come across your desk, Kelsey?
Of course, right now, COVID is the big one, and it's no surprise with the constant changes to government guidance and what we know about the virus. That has been just a complete minefield for employers, and navigating that has taken up a lot of my time over the last year. But other kind of general sticky employment situations I see come up a lot are monitoring and disciplining employees for social media use and kind of how best to handle those situations. And then deciding whether and how to enforce employment agreements you might have.
You bet. There's plenty of things that can arise in an employer-employee relationship. So when you're dealing with those, what sort of best practices do you advise your company clients on?
My overarching takeaway or piece of advice for employers in general with sticky situations is to take the time now or ahead of time to really plan out how you want your company to respond if these situations arise. If a company has, if they don't have policies or a handbook in place, or if they've just, copied and pasted from a legal Zoom document, and it's not tailored to their company, they can actually just end up doing more harm than good. If the policy doesn't match up with the day-to-day activity of the business, then you're going to have inconsistencies if you have to respond, for instance, to a discrimination complaint and explain why the policy says the steps are XYZ and you went ABC instead. So the number one tip that I have for employers of any size really are just to take the time ahead of time to plan out your response to the various employment situations.
You bet. And we see that pretty often, don't we? That somebody just took away their employee handbook from the internet, or maybe it's outdated and it matched 10 years ago, but it's definitely something that they need to keep current. What do you think about on the social media side?
So on the social media side of things, it's its own employment litigation nightmare. It keeps us in business, but unfortunately, on the employer side of things, it can really be a kind of a sticky wicket and difficult to navigate. Employers of any size really should have a social media policy in place and have that shared with their employees. Definitely annual training or maybe a situational training if there's been some recent activity can be really helpful because it does no good to have the policy if your employees are completely unaware of it. I've actually run into several instances recently where a former employee or maybe a customer has just started a social media smear campaign against a company. And those situations, while to the company, it's the end of the world. And they think that it's everybody in town knows what's going on. They're watching this unfold. Um, but the truth is, a lot of times it's really just kind of contained to maybe that person that posted it and 3 or 4 of their friends. So if a company doesn't have a plan in place on how to respond to that, their gut instinct is probably going to be an instant response, maybe a big public statement about the social media issue. And that's just not necessarily the best course sometimes. Um, unless it's really going viral, it's going to be in the company's best interest often to issue a simple statement or just kind of let it die down. When it comes to social media, less is more in the employment context for sure.
And I know with the divisive political climate we have in the United States, there have definitely been issues with people that have high-profile employees that take a political stance that might be contrary to what the company wants as well. Have you seen, or how would you advise clients dealing with those different issues too? Because then we also have political free speech, and I think those are tricky intersections.
A main thing to keep in mind, and one of the first things you'll always see pop up on social media posts with that type of context, is that the First Amendment doesn't apply to public sector. It applies to protect citizens of the states from public action. So unless you're a government employer, you don't have to worry as much about infringing on First Amendment rights. But when it comes down to it, you still want to handle that with as much grace and diplomacy as you can muster. And again, having a policy in place on no political leanings on company social media accounts. Maybe that's your general policy. But deciding how to react to, if somebody's bashing the president, that's something that you probably want to determine how you want to respond to. And that is one area where talking with an employment lawyer ahead of time can really be a helpful tool for a company.
You bet. So just to clarify, the First Amendment doesn't affect private companies. So private companies are outside of that First Amendment. So if an employee comes in and says, "This is my First Amendment right," and you're like, "Yeah, but you work here." And so I think that's always interesting and something for employment lawyers to educate their clients on a little bit, because I think that's not widely known. Kelsey, how can the Goosmann Law Firm help with employment matters?
The Goosmann Law Firm takes a team-centered approach to all its clients, and that is so key when you're dealing with employment matters. A lot of times I'll first meet a client because another attorney has just set up, their corporate identity for them, and I'm helping them draft employee handbooks or draft a policy or draft an employment agreement. But on the other end of things, if we've just gone through a massive employment litigation, it may be time, if this is a mom and pop business, to think about business succession and what the future looks like for the company. So I really love that we strive to keep things team-centered and also extend that to our clients. If I'm dealing with a CEO of a company, I want to know probably their HR person on the employment issues and get to know their decision makers. So that's one way that I think Goosmann kind of separates itself. I really appreciate that angle. On a more general approach, the Goosmann Law Firm handles, as I said, the front and the back end of employment matters. If you need a handbook drafted, we're here to help with that. But on the other end of things, if that handbook causes issues or if you run into a problem, we're here on the back end to make sure that any issues arising are handled as efficiently and smoothly as possible.
Outstanding. You bet. So we have some smaller businesses, mid-size, and then we have some Fortune 1000 companies that we help with these sorts of issues in the Midwest. And we love working with all those clients and helping them navigate these sticky situations. Well, thank you so much, Kelsey, for being on the podcast today and sharing your insight. Have a great day, everyone, and go make it worth it.
Thanks for joining us for Law Talk with the Flock by Goosmann Law Firm. We hope you feel energized and ready to soar past your goals. Become a Flock fan and subscribe to our podcast for weekly episodes. Learn more at goosmannlaw.com.